One late night in Paris, Driss is driving his employer, Philippe, through the city. As traffic drags on, Driss gets bored and decides to speed up, weaving through cars and ignoring traffic signs. The police give chase, and Driss bets €100 that he can lose them. But after slipping under a bridge, the cops catch up and surround them. Driss remains calm and ups the ante, betting €200 that he can get the police to escort them. Pretending to be outraged, he tells the officers that Philippe can't move and that he's rushing him to the hospital. When the police see the wheelchair in the trunk, they believe him. Philippe adds to the act by convulsing, and the officers, convinced it's an emergency, let Driss off for speeding and offer a police escort. To celebrate winning the bet, Driss cranks up September by Earth, Wind, Fire. When they reach their destination, he shares a smoke with Philippe as soon as the cops are out of sight. Driss then promises to handle the situation and drives them away just before the hospital staff can find them. This unlikely friendship began months ago. Philippe and his assistant Magali were interviewing candidates for a new caretaker, but the interviews weren't going well. Most applicants gave dull or awkward answers. Then Driss barges in, ignoring the fact that it isn't his turn. He only wants a signature on some papers confirming he wasn't hired, so he can collect unemployment benefits. He's blunt, a little rude, and even flirts with Magali, but Philippe finds him amusing and asks him to return the next day for his signed papers. Driss returns to his home in a humble neighborhood, where he tries to take a bath despite constant interruptions from his little siblings. He only manages to finish with the help of his older sister, Mina, who is more responsible. While waiting for their mum, Driss notices brother Adama getting out of a suspicious car. When Adama enters the apartment, he claims he's been at school and quickly leaves again after grabbing his bag, raising Driss's suspicions. Later, when their mum arrives, Driss gives her a Fabergé egg he stole and tells her he's been on vacation when she asks where he's been. She isn't happy to see him after disappearing for 6 months. He returns as if her home were a hotel. Frustrated with his lies and having other children to care for, she kicks him out, telling him not to come back. Driss spends the night smoking and snacking with friends from the neighborhood. The next day, Driss goes back to Philippe's house for his papers. The housekeeper, Yvonne, shows him around, explaining Philippe's daily routine. She also shows Driss the room he would get if hired, complete with a private bathroom. Driss can't help but admire the bathtub before being taken to see Philippe. Philippe offers the signed papers but also a job opportunity. Driss accepts a 1-month trial and Philippe bets he won't last 2 weeks. After settling into his room, Driss begins learning how to care for Philippe, stimulating his legs, helping him shower and change clothes, and even cleaning him after using the bathroom. Though Driss initially complains and says he won't do those tasks, he eventually accepts them as part of the job. That evening, Driss is interrupted on the roof by Philippe's daughter, Elisa, and her boyfriend, Bastien, who are looking for a private place to make out. Driss kicks them out after refusing to share his beer. Despite some early mistakes, like handing Philippe the phone instead of putting it to his ear or forgetting the baby monitor while bathing, Driss quickly adapts to the daily routine. He also organizes Philippe's mail, opening most letters except for private ones. When Driss finds a flyer promoting female escorts, he starts a separate file for them instead of discarding them, as Philippe had suggested. Driss doesn't forget to have fun in his new life. He continues to flirt with Magali, calls escorts to join him in bed, and occasionally oversleeps. One morning, Yvonne scolds him for being late and discovers dangerous weapons in his bag, but doesn't comment on them yet. Driss refuses to transport Philippe in the back of a van-like cargo vehicle, opting instead to take him out in one of Philippe's fancier cars. Initially, Philippe thinks it's impractical, but he quickly enjoys the faster ride, though Yvonne disapproves. When they try to leave the building, a neighbor is parked in front, ignoring a no parking sign. Driss confronts the man and forces him to move the car. Philippe is impressed, but Yvonne disapproves again. The pair visit a museum, where Philippe plans to buy a piece of artwork that Driss thinks is overpriced because it's just a red blotch on a canvas. Philippe later meets with a relative who is concerned about Driss's criminal record, but Philippe isn't worried. He appreciates Driss because he doesn't pity him and enjoys their banter. After another failed attempt at flirting with Magali, Driss has dinner with Yvonne in the kitchen, listening to Philippe dictate a letter to Eleanor, a pen pal he's never met. When Philippe experiences phantom pain, Driss soothes him with calming words and a wet cloth. Philippe eventually falls asleep but wakes up needing fresh air. Driss takes him for a stroll by the river, where Philippe confides that he can no longer please a woman due to his condition, but can still enjoy the sensation of having his ears massaged. When phantom pain threatens to return, Driss shares one of his joints with Philippe, who, though skeptical at first, ends up loving it. Later, they go to a restaurant where they joke around while sharing a meal. Philippe opens up about his past, explaining how he met his wife when they were students. After they married, she had 5 miscarriages and was diagnosed with a terminal illness, which led them to adopt Elisa. Philippe loved competitions, extreme sports, and speed paragliding gave him that thrill until a crash broke his vertebrae. He admits that his real handicap isn't the wheelchair but living without his wife. Philippe realizes Driss has passed his 1-month trial and officially hires him, but asks him to return the Fabergé egg he stole, which was a gift from his wife. The next day, Driss talks to Mina after school. She's upset because he hasn't responded to her messages except to ask for the egg. She also mentions that the cops have been calling their home. Later, Driss visits Adama, who admits he was caught with 30 grams of drugs. Driss wants to take him to lunch, but Adama refuses and gets back into the suspicious car. Later on, Driss listens to Philippe dictate another letter to Eleanor and decides it's time for Philippe to speak to her directly. He finds her number and calls her, forcing Philippe to take the phone. Their conversation goes so well that Philippe is constantly on the phone with her. Driss eventually convinces Philippe to exchange pictures with Eleanor, and Philippe agrees, choosing one of himself in the wheelchair. However, he secretly switches it for a picture of himself before he becomes quadriplegic. Driss notices Elisa making fun of Philippe for painting and tries to confront her. Philippe decides it's time to discipline her, and Driss listens in through the baby monitor. Philippe is surprised when Driss admits he's tried painting. Days pass and Philippe and Driss's friendship deepens. Driss takes Philippe to play in the snow, joins him on a run, and even buys him a suit. Philippe disciplines his daughter, and Driss hears everything through the monitor. Driss finishes his first painting and shows it to Magali, who slaps him when he tries to kiss her. Philippe, however, likes the painting and promises to try to sell it. They continue having a great time together, getting a faster car, sharing joints and even hiring escorts. When Philippe's birthday arrives, he pretends to be surprised at the party thrown by relatives who only visit to see if he's still alive. Philippe complains about how dull it will be, while Driss searches for Elisa, who is crying after taking pills in a failed suicide attempt. Bastien, her boyfriend, broke up with her, so she asks Driss to talk to him, which he agrees to do for a price. Meanwhile, Philippe shows Driss's painting to a relative and manages to sell it for 11,000 euros. Driss returns to the dining room and chats with Yvonne, who tells him that Magali is in a relationship with someone named Fred, giving Driss hope. As the party winds down, Philippe makes Driss listen to important classical music pieces, but Driss can only joke in response. Driss plays Boogie Wonderland by Earth, Wind, Fire and starts dancing in the middle of the floor. He's an incredible dancer and convinces the rest of the party to join him, much to Philippe's delight. Later, while putting Philippe to bed, Driss opens Eleanor's latest letter. She sent her picture and mentioned wanting to meet next week. When the day of the date comes, Driss uses his day off to visit Bastien and threatens him into apologizing to Elisa and bringing her croissants daily. Driss also visits his mother, who isn't impressed by his gifts, and asks if Adama is hiding at home. She says he isn't and asks Driss to leave again. Meanwhile, Philippe is driven by Yvonne to meet Eleanor at the restaurant. However, he starts doubting himself and eventually leaves before she arrives. Yvonne scolds him but stays with him for a drive. When Drive returns to work the next day, Yvonne takes him to see Philippe, who hasn't shaved in days. Philippe dismisses his help, upset at Driss for pretending not to know about Eleanor's picture. He also reprimands Driss for not knowing when to step back. Driss realizes something is wrong when Philippe refuses to get in the fast car. Later, Yvonne informs Driss that Philippe has been cutting him slack because he knows about Adama's troubles. It's time for them to move on. Philippe's relatives arrive later to replace Driss, scolding him for failing to take care of his own family. Philippe defends Driss, insisting that he has never pitied him and doesn't need anyone's help. They agree to give Driss a break from the job. Driss returns to his old neighborhood, reconnecting with friends and taking them to a party. When Adama comes home, he finally opens up to his brother, explaining that local gangs were threatening him, which is why he's been avoiding coming home. Driss forgives him and starts taking his role as a responsible brother more seriously. Meanwhile, Philippe struggles with the caretakers his relatives have hired. None of them are as strong or competent as Driss. He grows a beard and becomes grumpy and irritable. Yvonne worries about him and calls Driss, who rushes back to help. Taking Philippe out for a ride, Driss shows him the view from the cliff where he used to paraglide. They get into the car, and the story comes full circle. Driss speeds through the streets, with the police giving chase. Philippe catches on to the plan and plays along when they're pulled over. After tricking the cops, they laugh together and continue driving, but Driss refuses to tell Philippe where they're going. He takes him to a restaurant, where Philippe meets Eleanor, who doesn't seem to care about his wheelchair. Before leaving, Driss takes one last look at Philippe and says goodbye, ready to live his own life. The end credits reveal that the movie is based on a true story and that the real Driss and Philippe are still best friends.